Welcome to our interview series on Technology Impact Assessment, otherwise known as TIA. My name is Katina Michael. I'm a fellow at the Social Cyber Institute in Australia and also a visiting scientist at Arizona State University. This interview is part of the Australia-India Joint Impact Assessment of Critical Technologies for Peace and Stability project, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and our Indian counterparts, and has been ongoing since November 2024. In this series, we are focusing on technology impact assessment for peace and stability, but we also may venture into other territories. As today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Helaine Leggat, who's a distinguished fellow of the Social Cyber Institute and a non-executive director of the Critical Infrastructure Information Sharing and Assessment Centre. She's a practicing solicitor admitted to the Supreme Court of Victoria, Australia, and she's the former co-chair of the Australian Women in Security Network, the director of ISACA in South Africa, and the Australian Information Security Association. Helaine is an internationally experienced legal advisor to global companies and governments, and currently is the managing partner of ICTLC Australia, part of the ICTLC International Group that offers strategic support in legal compliance with respect to privacy, intellectual property, and technology, media, entertainment, and telecommunications, and assists in drafting and developing governance, organization management, and control models for data-driven organizations. Now, she regularly presents at international conferences and has been actively engaged in teaching and knowledge transfer for government, the private sector, and academia for many years. She's currently a teacher at the European Centre for Privacy and Cybersecurity at Maastricht University Faculty of Law. Now, that's a long bio, but Helaine, this is why you're a distinguished fellow at the Social Cyber Institute, but welcome.
Thank you so much, Katina. I'm really thrilled to be able to participate. I've enjoyed all the webinars so far, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you so much for coming, given how busy you are. Now, it's clear from your background that you have a legal disciplinary background. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Anything else along the way that supported that legal knowledge?
Um, I think it's core to who I am, and I hope it'll come through in this interview. I know that everyone you're including will come with their own background and experience and knowledge of the world, and it is um, that multidisciplinary knowledge and experience from diverse external input that hopefully will really add clout to what you're doing. And in preparing for this, I was looking at, well, what are TIAs and what does it matter? And, all the sort of academic stuff around it and operational stuff around it, but thinking, so who am I? What can I bring that is different? And it is the very fact that it took me years of my life to get to the point where I actually wanted a law degree. And it is that reasoning, that understanding that is fundamental to my approach to the work that I do and how I live in the world. So I think the question of who I am as a lawyer is really important to me because it goes to peace and stability in individual relationships, but also India, Australia, the rest of the world, because it's about the balance of power and relationships, and that will come through hopefully in all the questions that you ask me. But the difference for me is I'm not the kind of lawyer that wants to litigate. I'm the kind of lawyer that believes in the high ideals of jurisprudence. And a fellow said to me one day, for goodness sake, don't let anybody hear you say that. But it is absolutely who I am. And it is core to peace and stability. So let's see how this conversation develops and what comes out of it. But that's me. It took me a long time to get there, and I'm comfortable in the skin. So I'd like to approach what you want to talk about from that perspective.
That's very beautiful. I often hear conflicts in people's inner voices when I do interview them. That's not the case today. And having that oneness with the self in terms of practice is vital. So many people sell out to different types of vocations because of perhaps prestige or money in terms of remuneration or travel or the whole bit. But I had the joy of adjudicating a PhD candidate recently, and I could tell she was at one with the thesis. And
Mm.
I could tell during the Viva process and the Q&A in Finland, and it's very special. But thank you for that beautiful opening. Tell us about what you're doing presently. I know you're a managing partner, if I'm not mistaken, at ICTLC, but tell us more about that role.
Currently, in fact, for the last at least 4 years, I'm doing a lot in the health sector.
Okay.
Um, Let me just qualify what I'm doing now by the fact that I'm very much at the end of my career. I am transitioning to retirement. I'm working on projects for clients that I like, cultures and environments that I like. I'm not looking to build a big law firm. I did that. Let's just go back a sec. I came to Australia in 2012 on a 457
Mm.
security visa. I opened a law firm in 2013. I wasn't yet qualified to practice. I had to go back to Sydney University and do a transition so that I could practice law here. But I brought on principals that I could report to them. I bought those principals out subsequently and continued the law firm. And in 2020, in March of 2020, went international, which is why we're now, and I represent an organization that's in 53 countries around the world. So I'm living the life doing the things I love, wanting to contribute to projects that I like. And I'm very, very fortunate that I've got people who like to work with me on that basis. Um, so it's not purely a commercial thing. It's a belief in what we're doing, and let's help people. Very much the Australian mateship thing, and that is mirrored. We'll get to CI ISAC in a second, but it's mirrored there too, because it's all about leave no one behind, mateship, stronger together. But the work I'm doing now is largely in the health sector, a lot in health, aged care, and disability services. And that's important because it goes back to my early interest in what I call information warfare, which started in the early 2000s. And I watched trends of what was coming down the line. And I said to people that I worked with in the security community, how do you do that? What's happening? Is this what you're seeing? Um, and these things have developed very much so. But privacy and personal information it, people in Australia don't realize how important it is because this is such an innocent, beautiful place to be. But that information is actually who we are. The information on us is who we are. And that's a really important part in terms of the TIAs that we do. Big distinction. So that's where the core of my work is at the moment. Um, I am, through CISIC, which is parallel, very involved in the health sector. The bid, in terms of which we were successful getting the $6.4 million from the Australian government to uplift security in the health sector. So
Hmm.
the work that I'm doing through my legal practice and the work that I'm doing as an NED on CISIC are very closely
And with regards to the health uh, foci, uh, is it related to health impact assessments or um, identification of individuals and data privacy and data protection?
I would love to say yes to that. The fact of it is that the level of maturity is so low. What we do
Hmm.
is dealing with really simple things like who are the parties to the contract? What are the legal relationships? What are the supply chains and material suppliers into these environments? And teaching people who think, oh, we don't access that at all, what's actually involved. I'm talking about the CIISAC, which is
Aha,
Critical Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center.
got
So
it.
it's about intelligence. It's about sharing intelligence. And here we work with the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act of 2018. For Europeans or an audience from elsewhere, they might well know more about the NIS2 directive in the EU. There's some parallels with what's happening there, but essentially we've got, under our SOCI legislation, we've got 11 critical infrastructure sectors, and they range from financial sector to energy, banking, health, education, etc. 11. We've added a 12th one
Hmm.
voluntarily, which is local councils, because the reality is that that's where you have state hospitals on the ground. That's infrastructure. Um, so again, the technology impact assessment sort of relativity to this is that this is where warfare is happening. And it's not a new thing. It's not only a technology thing. You can go back to the Greeks and Romans. They always took out the critical infrastructure and they always took control of communications. So in that sense, it really is about national security. And because the health sector is the most highly targeted, that is your most valuable information because the stakes are so high, because you can literally ask for ransoms which people are bound to pay given that life is at risk. So that's the Australian context for intelligence sharing.
How does technology impact assessment relate to your work, given the backdrop you've provided for us?
In a way, I would say it's almost everything. And to explain that, I'll just redirect my attention for a while because the focus of the work that I do always involves how information flows across the architecture, who the legal parties are to a relationship. So you'll have company A, company B, company down the line. Most of what we do as human beings involves providing or acquiring a service or a good. So it's about understanding what that relationship is, who's going to do what for whom. Then you've got to look at what is that service that's being provided or acquired? What is the nature of the information that's being processed, collected, used, distributed, stored, all of that. I like the European definition of processed. Um, so what is happening? And to understand that and where it goes and who has access to it, you have to understand the architecture and more how cloud fits into it. If you do that, you know where the gaps and the problems are, and you know contractually what to bring to the party. So depending on who I'm acting for, it's going to be push back in some regards or really enforce somebody to perform for my benefit. But it all depends on what is flowing, where, who has access to it, etc. And to me, that is the foundation of a technology impact assessment. So while I've been doing this other stuff for a very long time, and now we're talking about TIA, it's the same.
Could you tell us what kinds of words you use to describe the analysis that you conduct? As you just mentioned, uh, different types of identification, flows of information, different stakeholder types, sort of originating and terminating points. What's the language that you use around that kind of analysis that you do? Is it technology impact assessment or it's called something else?
Well, because of the nature of the work that I'm doing a lot on at the moment, it's normally called a privacy impact assessment, but it's the same thing. Technology cannot be separated from the privacy impact assessments. What I like about your project and what you're doing is that it's specific to technology impact assessments, but within the context of peace and stability. And I think that's massive. So it's really what I so believe in. And frankly, this project of yours is funded by DFAT, and I've been bammering away at DFAT for a long time to say, go and negotiate more contracts. We need, new conventions
Yes.
out there. Get the world together and let's agree to a bottom line. Um, so I'm really pleased to see that. I see the bigger picture of this. So if we come away from the privacy work that I'm doing, the client work I'm doing, and uplift that to an international ecosystem or arena,
Hmm.
dealing not with clients, but you're dealing with countries. You're dealing with this balance of world power. You're dealing with issues of sovereignty. But I would like to think that we still do have a situation where sovereignty really means something. Countries have their own ability to choose who they want to be. I believe that's possible. I think that when we come together around international agreements, or as we did with the model laws in the 1990s, to say, let's agree to do something. This is a good way. So we talk about the sources of law that make human societies and balanced world power work. It's the same if you take that big model I'm talking about, to the client model. It's just a different degree. One is a finer grain of the other. But the principles of let's agree to how to operate well, work well. And again, getting away from litigation, as I said earlier, I'm not a litigation lawyer. I'm somebody who likes to find solutions, but within the context of allowing freedom. Choice is a better word. What it actually means is there is always a common bar. If you look at the Cybercrime Convention of Budapest, I think there's 67 countries who subscribe to that.
Hmm.
Most of them agree that these are all crimes. These are good things to do. These are bad things to do. The way we adopt those agreements into domestic law is exactly that. You'll have DFID go off, they'll negotiate on an executive basis an agreement internationally. We come back and it's written into domestic law. So you've got the domestic law of over 67 countries that are all agreed at a very good level as to what is good or bad behavior. So it's really easy if you can examine and analyze and find a common approach. And I think we can do that with technology impact assessments as well. I think the important thing is to realize that in the context of world power and in what's happening with technology, which um, is huge, is we need to find a way where we can agree on things but allow people freedom. And hopefully, I really, really hope that this project can help do that. I think it's really useful that it's only bilateral at this stage. I imagine if you get the India-Australia model going well, there might be other bilateral agreements, but there might also be multinational agreements. Um, there are so many good models internationally. Humanity knows what works well. Um, if you think about what we already have in terms of bi and multilateral agreements for peace and stability or sharing criminal information and things like that, people forget I think it was last time Donald Trump was in power, we saw, yes, it was, the promulgation of the Cloud Act. Now,
Hmm.
most people don't even know about it, but clarifying the Lawful Use of Overseas Data Act, um, which was then adopted into domestic law, or adopted, I should say, no, by Australia and the UK. And it allows for the bilateral companies, so the UK and America, and then Australia and America, to do certain things and share certain information. But also, it results in this tripartite agreement where we can actually talk to England about the same things. So, in terms of international peace and stability, we've got good models. We've seen how they work before. I don't believe in throwing things out. And I do believe in working with models that already operate, particularly when they're founded on thousands of years of human history. And if you think about it, I mean, that's all law is. Law is the rules that apply to a particular time, place, instance um, within a particular society at a particular time. And that's really what we're doing now. So it's about being able to pull things together and to assess what we need to do to achieve what we want, or where we might need to control unexpected outcomes.
Very interesting. The Cloud Act, it did cause some controversy when it was introduced, particularly on the privacy side of data being stored, and then the need to share between Five Eyes nations to support particular endeavors and for protection of our own infrastructure. And so it gets very tricky. I think you've described it well in a positive way of what's possible when working with other nation states. Uh, but this tension, and I'm going to call the peace and stability a tension, particularly by different stakeholders and how they perceive different introductions of different legislation in different places. But definitely your example of the Cybercrime Convention does allow us at the domestic level to at least be able to compare notes with the other signatories. Um, but it is very complicated. Could you tell us a bit more about the relationship between technology and peace and stability, even if it is in the guise of critical infrastructure. Uh, How does technology impact peace and stability?
Wow. The first thing that comes to mind, because there are many answers to that, the first thing that comes to mind is, frankly, it's just happening. But it's not the technology issue, it's people.
Mm. Hmm.
I think behind that it goes to power and money. I've been watching for a long time. Again, I mean, I've been in this field since the late 1990s. Um, and again, going back to the sources of law, which we discussed earlier, one of the sources of law is this idea of long time and long use, and it becomes a custom. And then because most people do it over a long time, that becomes the basis of law.
Mm.
What we've seen in the last 20 plus years is that happened really, really quickly. But in my view, it is still a source of law. I mean, I have watched the likes of, I mean, Google, I think they founded in, was it 98? Um, all of the big providers, all of the big operators today, they are organizations with millions and billions of clients, customers, participants. They are bigger than countries. They
Yes.
trans, they trans, um, they cross physical borders. It's as if they sit above the physical world, but they have no boundaries of physical jurisdiction. If you look at the definition of government, to have government, you need people, you need rules, you need to be able to enforce them, etc. There are a number of things that say if you can do these things, you actually have a government that can control a country. And these massive organizations like Meta and so on, more that they they are like government, but bigger and different. And at the same time, they don't want to be regulated. What I'm fascinated by at the moment, and you can see quite a lot written, it really, it's illustrated in what's happening in America. There's this push between stagnation and Armageddon.
Mm.
So how much do you want to change? Why would you want to change it? There are proponents like Peter Thiel who say, oh, things have been stagnating for so long. Let's push in some change agents, i.e., Trump and so on, and let's see what can happen. Let's disrupt. But is that what we want? Some people will say we don't want a one world view. I prefer the view of letting people be who they want to be, giving them freedom of choice, but finding this commonality, because I think humanity needs that. And honestly, in all the history I've studied and the history of law, Roman Dutch law is what I had to study, so it really goes back a long way. Humanity doesn't change. You know, the robbers and the barons and the guys with the big muscles and the big swords, they grab what they want anyway. Um, so if you look at technology, again, the world doesn't operate without technology now. You know, you really have to get in your bicycle and go to Brunswick if you want to leave your phone behind and take some
Yes.
coins or trade a pumpkin or something. It's people say to me, I'm not getting data, or I'm only interested in IT, or this is not an IT project. Well, what isn't? Almost everything that we touch or do involves technology. So take that as done, accept it. It's simply a question of how do we want to live our human lives? And
You know,
that's why these impact assessments are so important.
you're the only person I've asked so far, and I've done about 12 of these interviews, but you tended to look at peace and stability towards the securitization of humanity almost,
Hmm.
of people and planets, of both. And it's very interesting you talk about everyone wants rhythm almost. You didn't say that word, but it felt like it. We need a constant rhythm within which we live our life with freedom and autonomy. These are aspects I think you were alluding to. But the fact that technology is now a given in everything, that's something very important. Um, and I think without the stability and peace, we can't flourish. We can't reach our potential, potentially, as humans.
Correct.
Um, but the relationship with securitization, I think you've brought out Even though you didn't mention the word, it felt like it. Do you have anything to add about the notion of securitization?
I think it's a fundamental human need. Um, Without that, we go back to um, the disruption of war or poverty. You know, if you think about, I worked in Madagascar some years ago, and I never saw anybody overweight. The country was so poor in the south where I was working on a technology project, actually, for a big mining operation, um, that people's entire waking life was about finding food or how to eat it, how to cook it. You know, they'd dance around for half an hour when they found three little cockles the size of your thumbnail. And if we don't have certainty or security in terms of fundamental needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we will be floundering around and we will not be able to advance in terms of um, intellectual capacity and thinking and making things better for the future. Um, and the fact of it is, hard as life is, we have made things better over many, many years. People are eating better generally, they're taller, they're healthier, we're finer specimens than we were 200 years ago. Um, uh, you know, there are big questions in terms of the future and technology. Do we want to go to Mars like Musk suggests? Or do we just want to stay here? It seems to be people either want to be brave or they'll just keep going. But at the same time, we keep breaking things. And to me, that's a pity. Breaking disruption.
Yes. Especially when we break them quickly and move fast, according to some of the Silicon Valley folk. Your criteria and methodology for identifying critical and emerging technologies. If someone says to you, Helaine, uh, what's your top list of critical emerging technologies? How do you identify that, a criteria towards that, and what kinds of methods might we employ?
For me, that goes to being aware and reading a lot, really, really reading a lot, and watching for trends. That's my experiences. If you do that all the time, if you're aware all of the time and watching and reading as broadly as possible, you will find the trend, and the trend will point to something that's happening. Um, I don't know if other people can do, but I've had an uncanny ability to know what's coming. So going from law to say security's got to be big, from there to say privacy's got to be big, from there to say security's got to be big, intelligence has to be big. Um, that's if you watch that, you know what to look for, you know what the questions are, you know what the issues are. If you've got a hook into that, you'll have more specific questions as to what is it that you need to inquire, or what is it that you need to actually assess. I think a very big part of that also is what is the context in which this is all happening. Um, and the reason it's such a big issue at the moment, it's a global thing.
If someone said to you, Helene, top three technologies that will impact the world in the next 5 to 10 years, what would you say?
Well, I think the AI thing is unavoidable. I don't really like to talk about it as a technology. And in fact, I don't even think it's that intelligent. It's just using everything they've grabbed from us and mixing it all up and giving it back to us in the best form possible. And as they say, there's not one AI, there are many. Um, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon again because there's money to be made in it.
Mm,
We become the pawns. But the point is that that's what we need to watch, because technology is influencing humanity. And actually, we need to influence back.
mm.
So the AI thing is definitely one. The other one is this issue of stagnation and disruption that I see happening. Some people are saying the world's boring. We've been doing the same thing since the Second World War. What's the point of NATO? Well, I'm an old baby boomer. I think, thank God we've had it. It's been really helpful. But people are beginning to ignore it. Countries are beginning to ignore it now. So um, there's a technology aspect to that. People are using technology in order to control or not control or comply with, UN rules and so on. I mean, if you look at the Middle East situation, if you look at the fact that um, uh, Iran was bombed without anybody following
Yes.
congressional processes, without getting approval, without Security Council involvement, um, just collect the intel, which is tech stuff, decide what you want to do, use all the clever stuff, tech, bombs, communications, and do what you like. So I think that the lack of what we used to call norms, standards and norms, which were
Hmm.
based not only but largely on what happened after the Second World War, that's all changing. And all the tech stuff comes with it. So how do I put that differently? It's a lack. Here we're talking about peace and stability. There isn't any. There isn't any. And technology is being used to grab, manipulate, and change and influence power in that regard. So that's all in a big bag. And worst of all is that it also bundles into AI. So perhaps the third point needs to be it's the cumulative effect of what's going on. The third thing that has concerned me for a very long time is the lack of truth, the lack of what we can, the inability to trust anything. Again, as an old baby boomer, it's very simplified, but I'll say, we grew up with the 10 Commandments, don't lie. Today, lying is a norm. How do we get back to truth? So perhaps one of the most persuasive and important things that I would like to see come out of this project and how we focus is how do we get human beings back to inputting and using technology in a way that can be trusted for the benefit of mankind. Um, I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for lots of things. I always say to young people, that's the problem. I hope you find an answer. I trust you to find an answer.
I think that's the most intelligent response I've heard so far to that question because often we talk about, technology is not just being shiny gadgets like I'm holding up a phone now. That's one way of viewing technology. Another is in terms of processes such as norms, standards. And then you spoke about probably the highest ideal, which is truth. Ontologically, that's underlying and underpinning everything. So that's another way of looking at it. And yes, I think we're being blindsided by the shiny gadgetry, whereas true technology are processes, even like laws and regulations and norms, and as you said, truth, uh, which is fascinating. And these things are eroding uh, to our detriment. I totally agree with that. What do you think the purpose now? If these are sort of the critical emerging technologies and processes we need to look out for, what's the purpose of a technology impact assessment? That word impact in particular.
Mm. Well, I think we need to take the plain English meaning there. Like, what will happen if? What will happen if that doesn't happen? Um, Quite literally, what is the possibility of an event happening or not happening? And then you've got to chase it down the rabbit hole, as it were, and try and collect the information and now analyze what you have, engage many different stakeholders, and in this case, from around the world. And again, maybe getting back to that cybercrime convention, but where do we all agree? Because if we all agree here, of course, people should have the choice of something on top that is preferential to them in recognition of culture, change, religion, which we already have in law. There's no one law for the whole world. Um, it needs, I think humanity is at very much an inflection point. and we need to decide what we want to be, how we want to live. Mostly what scares me, apart from the lack of truth and trust, is the powers that be that are so powerful that are leveraging that in order to manipulate. So we're getting to a world where you have fewer really powerful people organizations that control the rest of the world. So it's like the feudal system, peasantry. And if you think again of a simple thing like um, privacy and personal information, um, we have ourselves chosen to give that all up. So part of it maybe is that we need to fight back and say, I want a piece of what I'm giving you. The technology impact assessment would be fundamental to understanding how those sort of things might work in determining an outcome. But it needs people to sit around and say, what do you want? And listen.
Can you identify for us who these people are? In your ideal view of a technology impact assessment, who are the stakeholders and who are the participants?
I'm going to answer that question from my perspective, because otherwise it's theory and it's all over the place. If I start with a concrete beginning, I would say I would begin with my client.
Hmm.
And I would say, and that might be an NGO or a government organization, it might be a private sector client, say, what is this organization? Where are they registered? What do they do? What laws do they need to comply with? Particularly industry sector specific laws. Australia is so complex. People honestly do not understand this. I take instructions from Europe and they just say, do this. And I have to ask a million questions to say, it's not that simple. Question, 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 because you need to say what applies. So the stakeholder is, in the first instance, that client and the nature of the animal that comprises that entity and the law that applies, because the law is a stakeholder, the regulators are stakeholders, the client is a stakeholder. The clients of the client are all stakeholders, the members, whoever they are, and then all of the material suppliers down the line. Because again, as I'm going back to, the world largely works on the provision and acquisition of goods and services. Otherwise, we talk to each other, but not much gets done. Mostly it's about an agreement. So I come from, what's the agreement? Who are the parties? That will determine the stakeholders, those core and those secondary. And you've got to go down the line, because that will determine who must, on a mandatory basis, do certain things and who might choose to do certain things, and where they can wheel and deal and negotiate. But that, for me, creates the context of who the stakeholders are.
Do you think ultimately TIAs should be open, transparent mechanisms, or if it's for a private stakeholder or government, for example, security or defense agency, they have a right to keep it closed? How open, how transparent should TIAs be when they are being conducted for various clients?
Well, as a starting point, I think they should be open and transparent. There is, of course, always a need for national security, government intelligence, and so on. There's always, always a place for that. I mean, you can look at the way any law is drafted. It says you must do this. These are exclusions. The exclusions are always law enforcement, intelligence, national security. So there will be a gap for that. But that said, the purpose of government under social contract is to provide services to us, the people that vote them into power. So they're answerable. But we have a really good, thank goodness, democratic process and a fabulous country. I love this country.
Yes.
We live extraordinarily high quality lives. And yes, we have a good process for questioning how things happen. You know, the freedom of action and rights people will always moan and groan, but that's part of democracy, and it's good. It's good. So I think that answers.
Yes,
Mostly, but with exception, like everything else in law. The general rule and exception.
exception as well. Yes, of course. And what do we typically want to see in a technology impact assessment from your eyes and your experience, and what the main elements might be to a TIA?
Okay, well, again, from my perspective, the way I tackle it is, as I've just said, who's the client, what do we need to do, who are the stakeholders, what's involved. Um, Once you've got that, you know what you need to ask. It'll be the law that applies that requires you to do certain things. So let's take an example. Um, if you've got, say, a company that's subject to Security of Security of Infrastructure Act, they have to do certain things. They have to identify their critical systems. They have to know what information they've got. They have to do certain reporting. They have to have certain, critical infrastructure risk management programs. There are a set of requirements. If you go into each one of those, given what sector this organization works in, you will have the basic blueprint for how the TIA must work, who will be involved, what the questions are to ask, what the impacts might be. In fact, that law is a really good example because it virtually sets out if this, then that, what you're going to do, who you're going to talk to, is it protected, what happens if somebody else gets it. So I love the law. For me, it's a really empowering thing.
Yes. And how effective do you think the current methods are with respect to TIA when we are, for example, delivering a technology impact assessment to a government agency? Can it be incorporated, or do you see it as a dead end at times? Is it a live, ongoing process where there's feedback loops, or do you see it's being treated as an artifact? Here you go. I've done the technology impact assessment. Now I can go away. Thank you. The job is done.
Mm.
What are you seeing as a process, and what potential improvements can be made?
Okay, so not only in the context of government, which is your qualifying
Yes.
question, but generally, sadly, most people still don't care and just want to tick the box. That is changing. So if we go back to government, and again to SOCI, which is a good example, they're going to monitor. They're going to keep monitoring. We've also got now the new Cybersecurity Act of 2024, where they're going to monitor, and they've got bodies and provision to manage and monitor and upgrade things. We've also got a lot of enforcement action coming through, not only the regulators, but the cooperation between the regulators. So you say ASIC, APRA, OIC, they're all getting more and more feisty about pushing back when people ignore them. And because this is such a beautiful place to be, in the years that I came, it was always, we don't have to do anything, don't have to worry, that's all right, nothing will happen to me. That's changing. The
Yes.
problems are now becoming bigger and bigger. As to government itself, look, it can be tricky, and that's largely, I think, the result of democracy. One government gets in with a policy and they set out to do X, Y, Z, and snap your fingers, they're gone. Somebody else is in. And sometimes they pay big money to get rid of projects that the last guy started. But it does keep us, as the voting public, involved. I prefer to think, and I've seen a lot of good government in this country. So I'm not a skeptic. I've really seen good government, people who care and pursue what they set out to do. Um, Frankly, I have very little time for people who don't care and want to tick a box. I just try and avoid them. And they're not worth wasting time over. When I said earlier, I want to work with people who like what I'm doing, that's what it is. Be caring, be interested, be involved. And my experience of government, particularly in the last, I would say, well, actually all of my Australian years. In the beginning, I was a stranger, but slowly I've met people here, and my experience is a good one. They really are trying. Um, our experience with Hamish Hansford of Department of Home Affairs and Michelle McGuinness, particularly in relation to the CISAC health grant, has been excellent. Really, really good. Um, they do want to improve things. They know they're coming off a good base. If you look even at what happened with the 2023-30 cybersecurity strategy, things that needed to be dealt with were identified, and from that time they have begun to set things in motion. They really have. Also, we've seen, as a result of the strategy, we've seen new laws. And as a result of the privacy reform, we've seen new laws. So we're beginning to see all of these building blocks. And again, I'm not separating what I'm saying from technology assessment. It's the same thing. If you think about
Yes.
what I'm saying just now, what's the entity? What's the law? What do they need to do? That's where you've got to do that assessment of how is this information traveling across information architecture around the world, internally, externally, and how do you manage those internal, external controls? So that also, to enforce what I said earlier, emphasizes the stakeholders. And if you've got stakeholders, I must think you have responsibility and accountability. That was something else in my earlier years in Australia I didn't see. I come from Africa and we just say, do it, make it happen. Here, you can have 30 consultants sitting around a boardroom table, and the lead project manager can say, oh, you could do this or you could do this, and what do you think? And nobody answers, and nobody's prepared to make a decision. That's
Hmm.
changing. So, and I think if you I meant to raise this earlier, if you look at the NIST definitions and everything we know about technology, if you look at a system definition of a system or network, it actually says, um, it's people, technology, information, but specifically that it's people that interact with those systems. So that's us. Um, and I think if we approach what we want in terms of technology assessments, seeking peace and stability, and remembering that primarily it's people that drive this thing. It's a really good point, and you can hold people accountable by saying that's your role, these are your KPIs, this is what you need to do, um, and again that goes into what you write into a contract at the end of the day, or into your terms of the TIA.
You mentioned how positive it is for countries to work together and to also share aspects of conventions as they're implemented in their domestic laws.
Mhm.
Tell us what are the benefits of doing a TIA jointly with another nation state?
Well, it's exactly the example of your project, and it's a fantastic one because I think it's almost like a petri dish. You have a good ability to work things out together without the complexity of too many. So maybe that's why you do one-on-one initially, and then you expand that model. Um, so it would be simpler, it would be easier to engage. I think part of what really matters is finding two parties to this initial thing that are well matched or have similar interests or similar maturity. And I must say, I like very much that India is involved with this one, because if we're going to get the balance of world power right, and I think that is the issue as to where we are now, the West is changing massively. We know that. For me, the balance of world power sits very much within the context of the Australian situation. But because we have all the Western values, we have all the Five Eyes, and yet we are part of Asia. Again, as a foreigner coming here to the other side of the world, nothing could be more plain. This is Asia.
Yes.
This is Asia. And we have to learn to work and be part of this area, not keep one leg in the old world. We can have the best of both. If we're going to do that, I think that we need to learn to work with China and all these other countries. We're also seeing the regeneration of places like Japan and so on. But India has the biggest population. It's also relatively immature. It doesn't have its own uh, long history of privacy laws and so on. It's also federal. People forget that. There are many different communities. So lots of parallels. We've always been aware of our federal system by comparison with America, but we've got that with India as well. So I really, really like it. Plus, they're the biggest clout we can bring onto our team, and we to them, in terms of value systems and culture. And so, because we're also part of the whole colonial history thing,
Yes.
there's a lot of common understanding. Um, very much like what's happening. I hope it's going to help DFAT or provide clarity on what might be helpful for DFAT to bring us more peace and stability.
Yes. Yes. Do you see, I mean, you've mentioned so many opportunities just then, which are wonderful and so many positive benefits. Do you see any shortcomings of technology impact assessments?
Mm. I think there's always that. Um, there can't be one answer. It's going to be maybe you get the stakeholders wrong, maybe you have a disconnect in culture or what the outcomes sort are. But again, I think, and this is why I say law is so powerful, if you go back to my approach, which is what is the law that applies, you've got a really solid basis for agreeing to things. So I think that takes a lot of the risk out of it. But things can go wrong, as in anything can go off. So I guess you need to build in mechanisms to say if this doesn't work, what do we do? So maybe you have dispute resolution processes and so on, or maybe you just can the thing if it doesn't work. Um, but failure is something that needs to be thought of up ahead and addressed so that when you get there, you know what to do, or at least have an approach to how to approach it.
Yes. We've had some interviewees say technology impact assessments are not always perfect. Sometimes we got it wrong, they've said, and they've owned up to that as soon as they've realized they've got it wrong. Um, and in other cases, as you say, it could be seen as a compliance tick box for a private client that wants to, move forward in a particular context. But all of these are processes that are, uh, you know, open to any form of intervention. But interestingly, a lot of people have repeated, boy, technology impact assessment must be just another word for regulatory impact assessment. So they see that legal and regulatory aspect being very, very prevalent in the TIA process. But these are just thoughts that others have provided.
I'm interested to hear that. That's my position, and I've been talking about that from the beginning. Um,
Yes.
I, I wouldn't have thought, I would have thought it's the main or the only one at all. And by the way, on failure, doesn't worry me. If something doesn't work or you get it wrong, you can always redirect it. And then there are all the stories of somebody who tried to invent strong glue and it wasn't strong enough and it kept peeling off. So now we've got post-its.
Yeah.
Let's be creative because it's often failure that will open a new door. I think
Yes.
we can just
Yes.
open that.
Yes. And that was what Dr. Abubakar Moki said in Uganda, that that's his phase two, that they'll look at it and see if it's off course. Well, you just bring it back onto course. You don't abandon the technology, he said, or its implementation in that context. You just bring it back to put it onto course. So it is a fascinating discussion. And Helaine, you've been generous with your time. My final question is there anything else you wanted to add that we didn't cover in the interview, but that you've been thinking about since the webinars began or since we've been discussing this in the last hour?
Hmm. I don't think so. For me, it's an ongoing process of thinking and reading and talking to people. Um, but let me just say, most grateful for the academic world. I'm a professional, but I live on the periphery of academia. I always have, just because I love learning, and I've taught and tried to teach for many years. And I think that's what matters. So please continue your work and let it be not just theoretical, but let it become operationally implementable. But the SCI itself is such a wonderful organization. I'm so pleased to be involved because it actually makes a difference to have people who are smart, educated, open-minded, thoughtful, and able specifically to do the work, but importantly to communicate the results of that work so that it can become useful. And I'm amazed at how many people do this sort of work, my colleagues on the SCI in particular, and they are fast, they're hardworking, they get stuff out. Something will happen here, and there's work done 24 hours. It's fantastic.
It has been amazing to be part of this team at large, and we keep attracting quite incredible people. You've been an amazing force that's joined us, and I'm glad to have gotten to know you a bit more through the webinars, but even more today. It is what you say. It's a group that's action oriented and also has the academic clout behind them, just as in your case, and a lot of practice as well, not just within academia, but within non-government organizations, not-for-profits, and that third sector, which has often traditionally been ignored, but is where a lot of the work does happen to support development in whatever area of expertise, whether it's privacy, civil liberties, or human rights. In this spectrum of the third sector emphasis. But thank you for your intelligence and your articulation of something that's a unique interview from our set of interviews. I think you'll see that. I know you don't like playing back the interviews, but you will see the others, and you'll see what I mean. But thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helene.
Lovely to be involved. Thanks,
Thank
Katina.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.